The living room glittered with fairy lights, wrapping paper torn across the floor like battlefield debris. My sister sat cross-legged in front of the tree, her eyes wide as she pulled a glossy black box from its golden bag. The Gucci logo gleamed under the chandelier, and the whole room erupted in applause as my parents leaned in, proud smiles plastered on their faces. Then it was my turn. A tiny envelope slid across the carpet toward me. I peeled it open, my hands trembling, and found a single folded card, $2 tucked inside. My cheeks burned as my sister swung the $4,300 purse onto her shoulder, smirking like she had won a crown. Everyone laughed. I forced a smile. My parents didn't even notice the way my chest tightened, or how the room blurred around me. In that moment, they thought they had put me in my place forever. Narrator's voice, steady and low. They thought this would break me. But they had no idea what was coming. When people see my family from the outside, they always assume we're picture perfect. Big house on a quiet cul-de-sac, my dad in his pressed suits, my mom keeping the garden trimmed like something out of a magazine. On holidays, the neighbors would glance over our fence, smell the rosemary turkey, or hear the clinking of champagne glasses, and think, now that's a family that has it all together. But they never saw the cracks in the picture frame. I was the quiet one, the one who cleaned dishes without being asked, who remembered birthdays, who stayed up late to help with projects, or fold laundry after everyone else had gone to bed. I wanted peace more than anything. If something went wrong, I'd be the one smoothing it over, even if it meant swallowing my own frustration. My sister, on the other hand, was a storm, and my parents adored her for it. She had a way of filling every room with her voice, of demanding things as if the world owed her, and my parents rewarded that. Every tantrum became an opportunity to make her feel special. Every accomplishment of mine was brushed aside as if it were expected, nothing worth celebration. The first time I really felt the sting of favoritism, I was 12. I'd spent weeks saving my allowance in a little blue piggy bank shaped like a globe, coins rattling inside like tiny secrets of hope. I used it to buy my mom a birthday gift, a silver bracelet with her initials, the kind of thing that made my palms sweat as I handed it to her, terrified she'd see the cheapness of it. She smiled politely, patted my head, and set it aside. Not even 10 minutes later, my sister burst into the room carrying nothing but a hand-drawn card, stick figures, and crayon, and my mom gasped like she'd been handed treasure. She pulled her close, kissed her forehead, and said, "This is the most thoughtful gift I've ever gotten." That bracelet ended up shoved in a drawer. The card went on the fridge for months, moments like that stacked up like bricks. Slowly, quietly, they built a wall between me and them. I told myself it didn't matter, that being invisible was easier than being ridiculed. But deep down, I kept a running tally. Every laugh at my expense, every time my sister was lifted up while I was pushed down. By high school, the pattern was undeniable. My sister got the newest phone, the shiniest car, tutors for classes she barely showed up for. I got hand-me-downs and the phrase, "You're more responsible, you'll figure it out." The thing is, they weren't wrong. I was responsible. I did figure it out. But being strong isn't the same as being seen, and nothing cuts deeper than being invisible in your own home. One memory stands out. A summer barbecue, neighbors scattered across our backyard under twinkling lights. I'd spent all morning marinating chicken, setting tables, even fixing the string of lights that kept shorting out. When the food was served, my dad raised a glass to toast, the one who made this night possible. I held my breath, waiting. He turned toward my sister. "She planned everything," he said proudly. "My little genius." My sister grinned, soaking in the applause, while I stood there, smoke from the grill curling into my eyes until they stung. It was a small betrayal, but I remember thinking, if they can erase me in front of everyone, what else are they capable of? That night, alone in my room, I opened the piggy bank I'd been saving since childhood. Coins clinked against my palm, cold and sharp. It wasn't just money anymore. It was proof. Proof that I gave, even when nobody noticed. Proof that one day, I would make myself impossible to ignore, and yet I stayed silent, because that's what I'd always done. I didn't know it then, but silence wouldn't save me this time. By the time I hit my late teens, I had learned to expect disappointment. Birthdays were the worst. My sisters were grand productions, cakes layered 3 tiers high, balloons floating across the ceiling, relatives invited from every corner of the city. Mine were quieter. A store-bought cake, sometimes even left in the box, candles shoved in unevenly. My parents always had an excuse. You don't like a fuss. Or, you're more mature, you don't need all that. But even maturity has limits. One winter during a family dinner, I shared that I had been accepted into the advanced science program at school, something I'd worked nights and weekends to qualify for. My father didn't even look up from his plate. Instead, he turned to my sister and asked about her latest dance recital, nodding as if that were the only news worth celebrating. The silence that followed my announcement was louder than any insult. My fork shook in my hand. My sister smirked across the table, and my mom poured her another glass of soda like she was royalty. That was the night I stopped trying to make them proud. But walking away from their approval didn't mean walking away from their control. If anything, the more independent I became, the more they pushed back. My sister had a way of twisting things, making me the villain even when I was the one helping. If I refused to lend her money, she'd whine to my parents, painting me as stingy. If I said no to covering for her when she skipped chores, she'd claim I was making things harder on the family. And my parents believed her, every single time. It wasn't just at home either. The poison spread outward. At school, she told classmates that I was jealous of her, that I was bitter because my parents trusted her more. I could feel eyes on me in the hallways, whispers trailing behind like smoke. Even neighbors began echoing my parents' words. "Your sister is such a star," they'd say. "You must be so proud of her." Pride wasn't what I felt. What I felt was exhaustion. Sleepless nights where I replayed conversations over and over, trying to find the moment I might have said something wrong. My chest would tighten as I stared at the ceiling, counting the seconds until morning. The stress began to show. Dark circles under my eyes, headaches that lingered like storms on the horizon. And yet, somehow, I kept moving forward. One evening, I stayed late at the library just to escape the noise of home. I remember the weight of silence in that place, the way the lamps cast warm halos across the tables, the faint scent of old paper wrapping around me like comfort. That's where I met Jordan. Jordan was a year older, working part-time shelving books. He noticed the stack in front of me, psychology, resilience, family dynamics, and raised an eyebrow. "Research project?" he asked. I hesitated. Then, for reasons I couldn't explain, the truth slipped out. "No, survival project." He laughed softly, but not in a cruel way. More like he understood something without me having to explain. Over the weeks that followed, he became the first person I could talk to without fear of being judged. I'd tell him about the favoritism, about the way my parents' eyes slid past me as if I were furniture, about the way my sister weaponized her smile. Instead of dismissing me, he listened, really listened. And one night, when I confessed how alone I felt, he leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and said, "You're not crazy, and you're not invisible. They just don't want to see you." The words hit harder than I expected. For the first time in years, someone had pulled me out of the shadows. That was the first time someone reminded me I wasn't alone. The shift didn't happen all at once. It crept in slowly, like a storm rolling over the horizon. My parents had always played favorites, but once I started pulling away, they seemed determined to remind me who really held the power. It started with money. When college applications came around, they made it clear they would only help fund my sister's tuition. "She needs more support," my father said, as if I hadn't spent years quietly saving from part-time jobs. "You're independent." "You'll manage," I did manage. I picked up extra shifts, studied late, lived off vending machine snacks when my paycheck ran out. But every time I passed by my sister's gleaming new laptop or saw the stack of books my parents bought her, the resentment twisted deeper. Then came the family meetings. They were never real discussions, more like public trials where I was always the defendant. If my sister missed a curfew, somehow it became my fault for not guiding her better. If she spent recklessly, I was accused of being too stingy with the money I earned. My mom's voice would ring sharp across the dining table, while my dad leaned back in his chair, nodding like a judge passing sentence. I learned to keep my answers short, measured, neutral. But inside, I felt like a rope being pulled tighter and tighter. The breaking point came one autumn evening. My sister had crashed the car my parents bought her, speeding, texting, and ignoring every rule of the road. The repair bill was thousands of dollars. And somehow, in the twisted courtroom of my family's living room, the blame landed squarely on me. "You should have been there," my mother snapped. "You're the responsible one." "Why weren't you watching her?" I stared at them, stunned. "She's 18. She doesn't need a babysitter." My father slammed his hand on the table. "Don't talk back. If you were a better sibling, this wouldn't have happened." The words carved into me like knives. For the first time, I felt something colder than sadness. Pure, quiet fury. That night, I pulled out the old blue piggy bank from the back of my closet. It was heavier now, not with coins, but with folded bills I had been tucking away for years. Every dollar from babysitting, every tip from late-night shifts, every bit of change I refused to waste. My parents thought I had nothing. They were wrong. And that wasn't all. Jordan had been teaching me about documentation, keeping records, writing down conversations, saving receipts. At first, it felt paranoid, but now, flipping through the neat stack of notes I had kept, dates, times, exact words my parents had thrown at me, I realized I had something they didn't expect: proof. The thought lit a spark inside me. For so long, they'd convinced me I was powerless, trapped under their authority. But I had quietly been building my own kind of strength: evidence, savings, and allies. Still, I didn't let it show. I went through the motions, keeping my voice calm while they continued to corner me, convinced they had me under control. My sister sneered at me openly now, strutting around with a kind of smugness that only comes from knowing the world bends in your favor. She thought she was untouchable. They all did. Narrator's voice, sharper now. They thought they still had control. They didn't. The more I pulled back, the more desperate they became to reel me in. My parents had always favored my sister, but now it was something darker, an obsession with keeping me small, making sure I never outshone her. It wasn't enough to ignore my accomplishments anymore. They started rewriting them. When I landed a part-time internship at a local firm, my dad told relatives at a barbecue that it was only because a family friend took pity on me. When I got top marks in my courses, my mom waved it off as easy classes, while bragging about my sister passing a single exam she had nearly failed. The lies spread like wildfire. Soon, neighbors who once congratulated me on my work began tilting their heads with polite pity, saying things like, "It must be hard living in your sister's shadow." Inside, I burned. Outside, I stayed calm. But my sister wasn't satisfied with words. She wanted destruction. She began whispering rumors, telling people I was selfish, bitter, controlling. She posted half-truths on social media, painting herself as the victim of my supposed cruelty. I watched likes and comments pile up, sympathy flooding toward her, while I became the villain in everyone else's story. It was a masterclass in manipulation. And my parents were her biggest audience. Every week, another family talk, another ambush. They demanded explanations for rumors they already believed. They asked me why I couldn't be more supportive, why I was always against my sister, why I couldn't just let her shine. Some nights I lay awake with my heart racing, my chest so tight I could barely breathe. The stress gnawed at me like an endless hunger. I started writing in a notebook, not for comfort, but for survival. Word for word, I documented everything. The insults, the false accusations, even the tone of their voices. At first it felt like shouting into the void, but the pages grew thick with evidence, and slowly, my fear began to shift into something else: strategy. Jordan noticed the change. One evening in the library, he leaned across the table and whispered, "You're not just surviving anymore. You're preparing." He was right. I began moving with purpose. My savings from the piggy bank expanded, folded bills layered into neat stacks in an envelope I hid beneath my mattress. I researched financial aid, scholarships, anything that could keep me one step ahead. At the same time, I studied the art of calm, learning to hold my expression steady even as their accusations grew sharper, because cracks were starting to show on their side too. My sister's spending spiraled out of control. Designer clothes, weekend trips, credit cards stretched thin. My parents, desperate to cover her, began arguing in hushed tones behind closed doors. I caught fragments. Too much debt. Can't keep this up. What will people think? Their perfect image was splintering, and I realized they weren't invincible. The piggy bank, once a childish symbol of hope, became something more. A weapon. Every coin, every dollar I had ever saved was proof that I could build something on my own, proof that I didn't need their approval to survive. I began to imagine the moment they'd finally see it, the day I'd drop the truth in front of them like a stone shattering glass. That day was coming closer than they knew. Narrator's voice, quiet but certain. The day of reckoning was coming, and no one could stop it. The confrontation came on a rainy Saturday, when the sky itself seemed to echo the weight pressing down on me. My parents had called another family meeting I almost didn't go. But something in me knew. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I walked into the living room to find my sister sprawled on the couch, scrolling her phone, her Gucci purse perched on the armrest like a trophy. My father sat stiff-backed in his chair, arms folded, while my mother paced the carpet as though rehearsing lines. The script was familiar. "You've been disrespectful," my mother began, her voice sharp. "You undermine your sister, spread negativity, refuse to be part of this family." My sister smirked, not even looking up, as if victory were already hers. I sat down slowly, my envelope of proof tucked beneath my arm, my notebook resting on my lap. For once, I didn't rush to defend myself. I let the silence stretch, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, my father slammed his hand against the table. "Answer your mother." I lifted my head, my voice calm, almost too calm. "You want answers?" "Fine." I opened the notebook and began to read. Word for word, I recited their accusations from the past year, the nights they blamed me for her mistakes, the times they erased my achievements, the twisted lies they spread to protect her. Dates, times, exact quotes. My voice didn't shake. It rang steady, like a gavel in a courtroom. At first they laughed. My sister rolled her eyes. "What is this? Some kind of diary? You think anyone cares?" That's when I pulled out the second envelope. Receipts, messages, screenshots. Proof of her reckless spending, of the lies she told online, of the debt she'd buried them in while they kept covering for her. The room went silent. My mother's face drained of color. My father leaned forward, snatching at the papers with trembling hands. Even my sister's smirk faltered, her phone sliding from her grasp onto the carpet with a dull thud. For the first time, they were the ones on trial. I took a breath, my voice cutting through the storm outside. "I've spent my whole life being invisible in this house. You laughed when I gave, you praised when she took. You crushed me every time I tried to stand. But here's the truth. Without me, you'd already be drowning. Without me, this family's mask of perfection would have cracked years ago. No one spoke. The only sound was the rain hammering against the windows. My sister opened her mouth, but no words came out. My father's hands shook so badly the papers slipped from his grip, scattering across the floor. My mother pressed a hand to her forehead, her voice a whisper. "This isn't fair." I stood, steady and unflinching. "Fair? You don't know the meaning of the word. I don't want apologies. I want change." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. For the first time, I saw fear in their eyes, not fear of me, but of the truth they could no longer bury. In the days after that confrontation, the house felt different. Quieter, heavier. My parents no longer barked orders or staged family trials. They avoided me, moving around the house like shadows, as though I were a stranger. My sister shut herself in her room, her once boastful voice muted. The Gucci bag that had been her crown sat abandoned on a chair, its glossy leather dull in the dim light. The empire they built, of favoritism, lies, and image, had cracked. And the cracks were spreading. Neighbors began whispering after my sister's spending spree came to light. Relatives who once doted on her grew cautious, pulling back their praise. My parents' perfect mask slipped, and they scrambled to hold it together, but the more they tried, the more obvious the fracture became. For me, though, something shifted. For the first time in years, I felt light. Not because everything was fixed, it wasn't, but because I had finally spoken. I had claimed space they could never take back. I focused on building my own future. With the savings I had tucked away, I moved into a small apartment. It wasn't glamorous, secondhand furniture, walls painted a dull cream, but it was mine. The quiet was different there. It wasn't the silence of being ignored, but the silence of peace. On my desk sat the blue piggy bank. I emptied it for the last time, replacing the coins and bills with something new. A single $2 note, framed and pressed behind the glass. A reminder of the Christmas when they tried to reduce my worth to pocket change, and how far I'd risen since. Jordan helped me settle into this new chapter. He reminded me to celebrate the little victories, a scholarship won, a late-night laugh over takeout, mornings where I woke without the knot of dread in my chest. He wasn't my savior. I had saved myself, but he was proof that real connection was possible, outside the walls of favoritism and cruelty. Meanwhile, my family unraveled. My sister's debts piled higher until my parents could no longer cover them. The whispers turned into judgments, and the adoration she'd thrived on evaporated. She grew bitter, restless, angry that the world no longer applauded her. My parents, drained by years of enabling, lost the authority they once wielded like a weapon. I didn't take pleasure in their collapse, but I felt satisfaction in knowing their power over me was gone. Months later, on another holiday, I visited briefly. The living room was the same, tree in the corner, lights strung across the windows, but the atmosphere was different. My sister sat quietly, her eyes downcast. My parents avoided making comparisons. No golden Gucci bag, no humiliating card, just silence, fragile and uneasy. And me? I stood taller. I thought back to that first scene, the room erupting in applause for her while I sat burning with shame. Now the applause was gone, the smirks erased. I wasn't invisible anymore. Narrator's voice, steady, resolved. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. If you've listened this far, maybe you've felt it too. The sting of being overlooked, the weight of favoritism, the silence of not being believed. Maybe you've had someone try to shrink you, to erase you, to make you feel like your worth was something they could decide. But here's the truth. Your worth isn't theirs to give. It's yours to claim. I want to hear from you. Have you faced favoritism, betrayal, or abuse of power in your own life? How did you rise above it? Share your story in the comments. You never know who might need your voice. Because at the end of the day, strength isn't born from their approval. It's born the moment you decide, I am enough.